What's it about you that you found all of these different adventures interesting and you jumped into them?
To me, it just should always be about adventure. Yes, you want to push your body harder than you can, and just see how far it can take you. So I think, I like to think that I've still got a sense of adventure, and I'd like to think that I'm still going to try and push the envelope and find things that are different, that interest me,
Welcome back to the show, you guys. Today, you're about to meet an amazing person. You're about to meet one of my favorite guests on the podcast ever. You're about to meet Susan Hunt. Susan is an Australian living in Delhi for the last 15 years. She took to endurance sports many years ago and finished the Ironman Triathlon in 1991 in all of 12 and a half hours, which is pretty good. She's also a long distance runner. She's finished multiple ultra marathons, including the famous MDS, and also the RTR, the run that happens in the used to happen in the Dholavira region. She has also done some serious adventure racing, some open water swims, and a lot of skiing and a lot of climbing, and she's been to the top of the Everest. The stories are amazing. Susan is now 66 and she's fitter than most people half her age, and she has a ton of exciting things lined up. I loved meeting her and recording this episode. She's bold, she's fun, she's super nice, and I can't wait for you to listen to this beautiful, enriching, inspiring conversation. So without further ado, let's dive right in. This is Susan Hunt and me in the Find Your Ultra podcast, episode 38, Indulge Away.
Susan, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
What a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you.
At the beginning of this episode, I can tell you that this is going to be one of my favorite episodes.
Thank you. That's very sweet. You don't know yet.
No, how do I know that? Because vastness of experience that you have. I love people like you, people who've done crazy stuff and continue to do that. Yeah. So I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Thank you. That's very sweet.
Let's get to know you a little bit. You're an Australian living in Delhi for the last 15 years.
Correct.
And you've been in endurance sports for a while. You've been a climber. You've done open water swimming and various other things. Before we get into all of those, let's get to know you a little bit. Like, where were you born? Where were you raised? What was your childhood upbringing like? Please tell us.
So, born in New South Wales in Australia. My father was in the Air Force, so I had a typical Air Force brat upbringing, moving around from place to place. Mm-hmm. Mountains didn't ever feature in my growing up. It was always beaches and fishing and sun, surf and sand. But yeah, it was pretty normal childhood. I suppose it was slightly informed by the timing in that I grew up with tales of Edmund Hillary climbing Everest, and people like Donald Campbell with the Bluebird. I don't know if you're probably too young to know this, but there's a guy who set a world speed record on water in England and famously died crashing his boat doing that, called the Bluebird. And so, my brother had a toy version of the Bluebird. And I think Australian kids tend to grow up outdoors with, because we've got a great climate. And those sorts of outdoor adventures appealed, I think, to kids growing up.
So, but then Everest happened, like when you were pretty young, you learned that someone's climbed the Everest.
Yeah. So Edmund Hillary being New Zealand, which is our kind of like neighbour.
Right.
I think that's why, and it was around about the time I was born, as I recall. And so it's something in the national psyche. Everybody knew about Sir Edmund Hillary. And
so it had that sort of an impact. And so you think kids around that time became pretty ambitious and a lot of them wanted to sort of do it?
I don't know that everybody wanted to, but I think everybody always saw it as an amazing feat and, sort of something for the Antipodes to be proud of, that it sort of came out of that part of the world.
Okay. And so you wanted to do that at some point?
I did, yeah, in the back of my mind. Okay. It was a very long-standing...
Right, and then journey wasn't straight to the Everest for sure. Oh, no. Journey went all over the place.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So your introduction to, I think, outdoors was, like you said, all the children in Australia, most of them have an outdoorsy sort of upbringing.
Correct.
And your interest in water was obvious because of the availability and accessibility to the beaches.
Absolutely.
And so you first fell in love with open water swimming?
I guess so. I think my very earliest memories of swimming was swimming across a river estuary where my father, I was 2.5, I think, and maybe 3.
Wow.
And my father and my brother had seen some treasures on the bottom of this estuary, a saltwater estuary, so it's quite clear, some coins and stuff like that. So he just pointed me in the direction of the other side and said, right, you swim over there, we're going down. And looking back, I mean, it was outrageous. So I was only really quite tiny, but that's the sort of.
But really, 2.5, 3, you were swimming in a river.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's a estuary, so clear saltwater river. You can see the surf and stuff. But I think I learnt when I was 2 to swim. And Australian kids grow up sitting in buckets of water, splashing around. Water is not a thing that we're scared of.
Wow. Like I said before we started rolling, my daughter's 2.5 and I would love her to, learn swimming. So we'll connect after this and
now's the time to get them, definitely, if not younger.
Wonderful. So then what was your first sort of event thing that you did with the open water swimming? What was the first swimming event?
So swimming, I swam. I didn't swim competitively. I just always swam because I love the ocean and I love water. And then I went through my 20s as a workaholic and, kind of put all thoughts of anything physical aside, apart from, aerobics, because we all used to watch the Jane Fonda videos and work out and what have you. So when I turned 30, I stopped smoking. So mea culpa, I used to smoke, a lot, 2 packets of cigarettes.
Wow.
And I was... so I was just one of those type A personalities that was always into going to, I would be at work every hour that God gave. So when I gave up smoking, I realized I'd better do something, otherwise I was going to get fat. So I, at the time, a chap who worked for me had done the first Ironman in Australia. So we're talking 1989, I think he'd done an Ironman in Australia. And I thought, that's a good thing to, to train for and keep the weight off. So I did a mini triathlon, and then about 12 months later did the Ironman, the full Ironman. So we're talking 1991. That was 22 years ago, 32 years ago. What am I saying? Long time ago.
Wow.
So that was my first, kind of time. And I wasn't sure I could swim 3.8 kilometers. I could swim at breaststroke, but I didn't know. So I remember the first time I swam 3.8 kilometers, which is the length of the swim, thinking, whoa, okay, I've got that nailed, tick that box, I'll be okay with the rest of it. So even as a swimmer, I wasn't confident that I could do that.
Yeah. But Ironman is a very different game. Like swimming was your sport, but there are 2 other sports, right? When did you get into those? And did these distances not scare you, like 180 kilometers, a bike, 42? Had you run a marathon? Were you a runner?
Goodness, no. No, nothing like it. In fact, I ran my first straight marathon not even a year after the Ironman, about 6 months afterwards, which was really way too quick. But so I don't know, in Australia, there are just groups of people who do everything. So there's squads of people who cycle and people who swim and people who run and stuff. And so I guess in the groups of people I was hanging out with, it wasn't anything unusual. So there were people that I would run with at lunchtime who were training for the Comrades Marathon, which I'm sure you're aware is, kind of like 90 Ks or 95 Ks, whatever it is. So they wouldn't think it was particularly odd that you might be training for an Ironman. And then cycling, I remember my first pink bicycle, which was fabulous, but I knew nothing about bikes. And my boyfriend at the time said to me, okay, so I'm not taking you out cycling until you can change a tyre. Which was the best training anyone can give you, because I see people here, they get a puncture and straight to the auto rickshaw home or take it to the bike shop. And so that was way back, kind of. And I had this pink bike and I trained on the pink bike and I loved it to death. And in Australia, I mean, it's cycling paradise. You've got beautiful, kind of roads. And the biggest problem is the drivers, because they're all mad and they drive too quickly and they've got because they're used to big open spaces, they're not very cyclist aware. But other than that, it's just perfect, the climate.
Still better than here, because we've got mad drivers and combined with bad roads for cycling.
Yeah, but the drivers aren't quite as mad. I mean, they are in the middle of Delhi, but at least they're not going fast, generally. They come too close to you, but they're not going fast. So that's where I did most of my, kind of ride training out in the northern beaches in Sydney, lovely rolling hills. Yeah, very spoilt.
And this was in 1991 we're talking about?
Yeah, that was when I did the Ironman. So I was 31, I think, at the time.
Okay. So you said, you were really blessed to be a part of this circle of athletes around you? Was that the case?
Yeah, but just
because there was no
so many
Facebooks and Stravas at the time.
no
how did you
WhatsApp
connect with
groups.
people?
But you know, it's an excellent question. There weren't even mobile phones, as I recall.
Yeah.
So it was just word of mouth. You know, you decided your last run where the next one was going to be. There was a group of people called the Sydney Striders, I remember, and I used to do a lot of my long runs with them. But I've always loved running on my own. In fact, I've always loved doing things on my own, and I think the whole Air Force upbringing may have been part of that. I'm very comfortable with my own company. I like doing most of my stuff on my own, actually, if I'm honest. I don't like the pressure of other people around me, except for cycling. I enjoy, kind of group cycling. But swimming, obviously quite solitary, running, yeah. But the groups, good question, actually. I've got no idea how we used to organise ourselves, but it was very regular. You know, on a Wednesday morning it would be this run. On a Saturday morning it'd be a run between whatever distance, or the cycle would be going out to, kind of might be a 100k ride, might be a 150k ride.
So, like taking a little detour here, but what about your friendships and relationships when you're moving around so much, being an Army kid or a Air Force kid?
Yeah. You learn to rely on yourself a lot more, I think. I mean, you make friends, but you know that those friendships are going to have to break in a couple of years. So in the back of your mind, I guess, you sort of think, I'm okay on my own. And also you're around adults a lot. On Air Force bases, you tend to be mixing with both the kids and their parents. There's a lot more camaraderie. So I think that's probably informed also where I headed along the triathlon route, because it's a very individual sport, and it's and you do each of those things yourself, even though you can choose to be doing some of it with groups of people.
They say that most of your friendships are actually formed by the age of 25, and you don't make too many friends after. You only make acquaintances after 25. But I guess that's not true for the kids of the people in forces. Right?
Yeah, they have done surveys apparently about the different kind of psychological traits of services kids. For me, definitely, it's most of my friendships, long-standing friendships, are after the age of 25. Because it's almost impossible for me to track down. I mean, I've never been to a school reunion, probably wouldn't recognise anybody. But, I have some very good friends that I've had from the age of about 30, I guess, 30 onwards.
Okay. I just want to go back to your open water swimming. I think you've done a couple of events before the Ironman training started. A couple of open water. Was that a relay that I read about?
Yeah, actually, that was after the Ironman. Yeah, it was after the Ironman.
Okay.
Okay. But I did the Maui Channel swim and the Waikiki rough water swim. Maui Channel swims across one of the deepest channels in the world. So it goes from Lanai to Maui in Hawaii, and it's in a relay of 5 people, and you swim for I think it's half an hour each, and then it's half an hour. So you kind of go you change over midstream. So a bit like swimming the English Channel, but it's shorter. It's shorter, but it's weirder because it's being one of the deepest channels in the world. When you open your eyes underwater, normally you would see refraction of light coming through for at least a metre or something. But here it's like inky black, just black, because it's so deep and quite spooky. So, and full of sharks.
Oh.
So, which the English Channel isn't. But it was also, just kind of amusing. I was doing it with a bunch of guys who were all stockbrokers, and they had this, kind of weird banging on the side of the boat, giving each other signals, and they're just like, whatever. I had no idea what they were talking about. But it was quite the experience. But that same trip, so a lot of Australians go and do these sorts of things. So I guess I was over there with maybe 30 Australians, and the rest of the world would come and compete in this event as well. When we all got to know each other, I suppose, the Australians. But also we did the Waikiki rough water swim in Hawaii, in Oahu. And that is what the original Ironman is based on. So it's a 3.8 kilometre swim that goes out from Diamond Beach in Waikiki, and then kind of goes out, turns right, comes back in again. So the original Ironman was based on 3 guys getting together and trying to prove who was the fittest, the Navy guy, the Army guy, or the Marine. I can't remember now what they were. And so they put together the round the island, so the Waikiki rough water swim, which existed, the round the island bike race, which is 180 kilometres, and the Honolulu Marathon, 42.2 kilometres. So in the beginning, it wasn't contiguous. They sort of, or it could be, but they stopped to have, kind of, one guy actually stopped to have a sleep, and he sort of finished it off the next day. But that was quite exciting because it was going back to history, sort of swimming the Waikiki rough water swim.
Right. And that wasn't a relay. That's
it, not a relay. That's a straightforward swim.
And any sharks in that water? No.
No, not that I'm aware of. No. But they must be somewhere around because it's not that far from Maui and Lanai for the other swim.
Okay, so coming back to your Ironman training then. So you did the Ironman in 1991 and you finished in a pretty good time, 12:31 or 12:30? 12:38?
Looking back, actually, it wasn't a bad time. At the time, I was thinking, I'm such a loser. And because literally you are surrounded by some really good athletes in Australia. But looking back at the age of 30, that was, kind of having done one other triathlon only prior to that, it wasn't so bad. I killed for that time now, actually. But
yeah, it was pretty good. What was your family like around that time? So when you said that you're going to do, has your family, like, how have they reacted? I know how they reacted when you announced Everest, and we'll talk about that. But when you said you're going to do a triathlon, Ironman, what did they say?
I think there was a bit of head shaking going on, but they were more amused by the fact that every time I was living in Sydney, and I go to visit them on the Gold Coast where they'd retired to, and I'd take my bike in a bike bag. And like most triathletes, I was obsessive, so I'd go out for a ride every morning in the Gold Coast in Australia, and they'd be going, carrying this huge bag, kind of with the bike in it, and what's she up to? Yeah. So there was a bit of amusement, but no, they were pretty cool. They didn't really say much one way or the other.
Yeah, and what was your life overall like around that time? Were you employed? Were you full-time working somewhere?
I certainly was.
Making time? What was that like?
Yeah, no, I was still relatively workaholic. My background was in tourism and destination marketing. So I'd worked for the Federal Minister for Sport and Tourism in Canberra. I'd run the Brisbane Visitors and Convention Bureau, marketing Brisbane for several years, and then I was marketing director of Tourism New South Wales. And then I went to work, I think this is the right order, I went to work in Canberra for the Minister, that's right. And then I was running the Tourism Task Force, which was like a lobby group for the tourism industry that same minister had retired from Parliament and set up. Anyway, so to this day, I don't know how I managed to fit everything in because it was a full-time job and I was training a lot. Like, as I said, 180K rides sometimes, 120 at least rides every Sunday or every Saturday, really long runs. And in between trying not to get injured, so trying to get, have massages at least once a week, doing yoga once a week. So it was, I would, as an employer, I would never employ someone doing an Ironman. Just looking back on it, it's like, maybe I wasn't giving it my very best shot at the time.
Okay, let's not give too many ideas to employers listening here.
Okay, sorry, employers. Yeah. I mean, sorry, triathletes and their employers.
Yeah, because there are a lot of, in fact, a lot of CXOs do Ironmans and stuff like that.
It's a type A personality, obsessive, kind of, if you want to, the big next tick, jump on that bandwagon. It wasn't quite like that when I started, but it got to be more so. And I think that's why I moved on from triathlon, because I just felt like there's got to be more in life than your next run split and, your fastest bike split. And although, I mean, to be fair, I love all the technicality of it. I love all the machines. I love bikes. I love the mechanics of bicycles. And I find all that really interesting and still read triathlon magazines because I like to keep on top of trends.
Amazing.
But a lot of people who are overachievers in their business life and what have you will take up triathlon. And I think that's the other thing that I found quite interesting. As someone who wasn't particularly sporty growing up, most kids are very good at sport and then they will take those lessons into their business life. And that's the way I think a lot of chief executives and stuff have advanced. I did the opposite. Because I was such a workaholic, I took all of the work lessons and applied them to triathlon and the things that I was doing. So I think a slightly different perspective there.
That's interesting. Yeah. What was this feeling like? So, did you have too many Ironmans around at the time when you did this?
In Australia, there was only one, the Foster Ironman in New South Wales.
Okay.
Now I think there are, I don't know, half a dozen, if not more.
Okay. But did you have too many triathletes around you around that time? Or were you like in your circle, you were one of the first and one of the only, or not?
No, there were lots of triathletes. So we're talking 32 years ago.
Wow.
Kind of interesting, isn't it?
That's, amazing. Because I think in India, we didn't have too many. In fact, we probably had our first Ironman post 2010, if I'm not wrong. Or, definitely
Sounds
post
about
2000
right,
for sure.
Yeah, I remember doing a duathlon around Nehru Park in 2009, I think it was.
9.
Okay. And I remember hearing that somebody was planning something at Talcatora. I've never seen the point in doing triathlon where you do the swim in a pool, but anyway, it's another story. Swimming in the Yamuna is not an option, so I hear you.
Yeah, we have to go off for that. Wonderful. So when you did the Ironman, what was the feeling like? Did you feel that you sort of like it's a big accomplishment, and what was it like?
It was huge, and I think of all the things that I've done over the years, that's probably the one where I felt most invincible at the end of it, because you walk around insofar as you can walk, because the next day you're feeling like a bit stiff and sore. But for someone who'd never at that point done anything where I'd put myself on the line, my body on the line, I didn't know. I knew I was going to finish it. I mean, I know when I'm going to finish something. We can talk about that later, but it's almost like I'm drawn towards it. I've seen myself finishing. I've seen myself doing it. So I knew I would finish. I just didn't know what sort of state I would be in, how long it was going to take me. I didn't want to embarrass myself. You know, all those things. It's a complete unknown. When you've conquered all of that and you've sort of stopped and go, whoa, that's great. Physically, I felt I could do most things, not even just running or cycling or swimming, but things I never would have done before. And I remember going trap shooting, like off the back of a boat in Sydney Harbour. It was a corporate day or what have you. And I've never had any hand-eye coordination sports. I didn't learn tennis. I didn't learn, those golf or anything like that. And that requires quite a bit. And I was so confident that I'd be able to do it just because I'd become a physical person, if you know what I mean. Instead of a cerebral person, instead of using my brain to do stuff, I could physically do stuff. And I did quite well in the shooting, which was kind of remarkable to me. So that just stuck in my mind that, okay, I can now do stuff.
That's great. So the confidence of an Ironman carried into
everything.
That's incredible. I mean, now you look at Ironman and it's such a brand, and a lot of people are drawn to it because of the videos that they put out and the sort of marketing that they do. Ironman overseas probably has a bad rep now for various reasons. But we now get inspired looking at those videos, and we want to do an Ironman. You back then, because there wasn't a YouTube then, and you weren't watching those videos. You were just seeing triathletes around and getting inspired real time.
Actually, if I was to be honest, there were videos around because the thing that inspired me was watching Julie Moss crawling over the line, which is still the thing that I think a lot of people see and they go, well. So I don't know if your viewers, listeners would remember that, but very early days of triathlon, and Julie Moss was this red-headed athlete. I think she came from a running background, and she was winning by a huge margin, and she collapsed about 100 meters from the finish line in Oahu, in Kona, and she got up and fell down again. And of course, you're not allowed to get any outside assistance because then you're disqualified.
Right.
And she knew that, I mean, somewhere in her subconscious, and she was pushing people away. But the cameras are training on her, and it's at night by this stage, and she's literally crawling towards the finish line. And then she stands up, and then she falls down again. And all the volunteers are standing around being careful not to touch her. But then the girl who was coming second by a long margin behind her runs past her, doesn't realize what the tamasha is around her, kind of, she just sees lots of people near the finish line, goes past her and wins. Right. And then the second place getter also goes past, if I'm not mistaken, and I think she came in third. But one of the contestants then helped her up and over the line, and she just literally crawled over the line and got her hand over the line. Right. And for all of us, it was like, oh my God, if anyone can had that sort of determination. It was incredibly inspirational. I mean, crazy. Not, you don't ever want to end up at, crossing a line like that at a triathlon, but very inspirational.
It's amazing. Yeah, we've seen similar videos, and I may have seen this one as well. I just probably don't remember the name. Yeah, because we've seen quite a few of these in marathons as well.
Yeah, exactly. People who push it, and I think there is quite a lot of evidence about type A personalities, eating disorders, marathon runners, ultra runners, triathletes. There's this whole interesting thing that goes around that. Hopefully will sort itself out in time. But
tell me, what sort of research are you talking about when you say type A personalities do what?
Well, people who are overachievers, who are pushing themselves very far. And certainly I know there is quite a lot of data about marathon runners, like at the Olympic level, and from a female perspective, because so many of them have amenorrhea because their periods cease because they're underweight. And there's this pressure to stay underweight because of the performance, kind of metrics and VO2 max, all that sort of stuff.
So you did the Ironman, and then is that where your triathlon love sort of took a back seat?
No, I did that, and then I thought, well, okay, I know I can go a long way now. Let's see if I can go faster. So that's when I started training for Olympic distance, and that's when I ended up at 2 World Championships, one in Cancun and one in New Zealand, in Wellington. For as an age group, not as an elite, but I was able to set new goals, that I wanted to get faster, and did. So that was quite good.
That's amazing. But then you didn't carry that forward into the longer distance triathlons, the Ironmans?
Well, I started at Ironman, went to shorter distance of the Olympic distance. Then when I moved to England for work, and I then started, by that stage, triathlon was, I'd been doing it for 10 years, and I was a bit, as I said, a bit bored with splits and, kind of the triathletes being a bit narrow. So, and I was much more interested in the outdoors and, starting to get into things like mountain biking and off-road triathlons. So I'd started doing that in Australia. There's a thing called the JLW Challenge, and that was
Is that the one you did with 3 heavy
Oh, no, that's the Eco Challenge. That's a whole other ballgame. But yeah, that one, I think we should talk about that. Yeah. But this was just it wasn't just, but it was you could either do it as an individual or as a team of 3. But it was started with a trail run in the Blue Mountains of about 25 Ks, and then it was a kayak, a mountain bike, of about 50 Ks, and then it was a kayak, which was about 20 Ks. And then the next day you started again, and it was a road bike, and then finishing with a trail, kind of a trail run into Sydney.
No.
So anyway, that's the sort of thing that I used to enjoy, got into. So I really started loving mountain biking and kayaking, and then I won that, my age group for that, probably because I was the only one in it, again, if I recall. But there were 3 guys who were putting together a team for the Eco Challenge. So the Eco Challenge is this event that's been going for many years, or had been going for many years. It was set up by the guy who created The Survivor, the TV program. His name escapes me now. But anyway, so he'd failed in that, this particular event, because it's very tough. And so he created his own called the Eco Challenge. And it's always different because it goes to different countries each year. And so the year that I did it was in Borneo in 2000. So we're talking jungles, we're talking, oceans. And it was a mix of open water paraus, which are like outrigger canoes, they're very narrow, very tippy. It was co-steering, so you had to swim with all your kit and what have you on the coastline. You had to climb over mountains. You had to abseil. There was a 600-meter abseil. There was climbing, jumaring up a rope through a bat cave. This went on for 10 days. So that was the maximum time you had for cutoff.
Wow. So
and you had to carry all your own equipment. So there were only three what do you call them? Kit changeovers. So you had to take, for example, your swim fins and your all the rest of your helmet for climbing, what have you, on your pack while you were mountain biking. So, going downhill on a mountain bike when you're not used to it with a heavy pack on your back is kind of interesting. And then in the water, you had to have a plastic bag around your pack because you were swimming through the water with the pack for 1.5 kilometers, and then you had to get out on that crazy stuff. But the worst part of it were these three guys, as I started to say, who saw my name as someone who'd done this I was 40 and I'd finished this off-road triathlon, and they were looking for a fourth member of the team. Because if you were three men, you had to have a woman. If you were three women, you needed a man on the team. You had to have somebody of the opposite sex. So they reached out to me, and I jumped at the opportunity because it sounded like a proper adventure.
Yeah.
But the problem was I just accepted a job to work on the Commonwealth Games in Manchester in England. And that was at the beginning of 2000. And this race was in April, I think, in 2000. So I was going to have to juggle all of this. Anyway, I did. And the training for that in a place like Manchester was kind of interesting. But how I found the Lake District, which I fell in love with afterwards.
Yeah.
Because it's quite near to Manchester. So I go off and I do this race. But the hardest part of the race, and it was tough, it was by far the toughest thing I've ever done, including Everest, by a factor of some.
But 10 days, you're saying? That's 10 days.
Yeah, and you choose when you sleep or don't sleep.
The only thing I can compare this to, or in amongst the things that I've seen and heard, are small challenges like Devil's Circuit that happens here, which are just obstacle races, like miniature versions of those obstacle races, which will probably have 5K and you'll probably do them, an hour or two at best.
Yeah,
but can't imagine the real thing with the real mountains, with the real river and the mountain biking and going on with all that load for 10 days.
Yeah, it was. Well, actually, we finished it in 7 days, 7 or 8 days. I think 10 days was the maximum that you had.
Okay,
I think it was
there was a cutoff.
There was a cutoff, yeah. Okay. And there were cutoffs at every leg, which I didn't know about. In fact, neither did our captain.
Okay.
So, we'd stop for a bit of a nap on the side of the road after the mountain biking because literally we had to push our mountain bikes up these muddy, kind of paths up a mountain because we couldn't ride that. And we just started riding. We thought we'd have a sleep. And then another team went by and said, oh, you're keen, having a nap. And we said, what do you mean? They said, well, the cutoff's only in... And our captain said, what cutoff? So suddenly we're back on the bikes and screaming towards this cutoff. But these three guys were the biggest challenge because, there was toughness. There was, because lack of sleep is one of the biggest issues in these adventure races because you choose when you're sleeping. You kind of grab naps for a couple of hours at a time over days. And these three guys were monosyllabic to start with. They were not great communicators. But they started off saying that we all had a goal and we just wanted to finish as friends and finish, which was more than at least half the race did. Half the race dropped out. There were disqualifications. There were people, it was a mess because the boats were getting smashed up and it was quite interesting. And these guys, somewhere along the way, decided they wanted to finish in the top 10. It's like, whoa, no one's told me this. And I've been in Manchester, kind of trying to set up a new job and, blah, blah, blah. And where did this come from? Oh, virtually shut up and get on with it. And, they really felt that I shouldn't malign them, but they felt that if I had time to talk to any of the other passing contestants, that I should be trying harder, which was rubbish because I was always like the second or third in the group of four, no matter what we were doing, whether it was mountain biking or abseiling or climbing or, all the rest of it. But anyway, that was the Eco Challenge. Yeah, it was something else. And Mark Burnett, that's his name. Mark Burnett, the guy who set it up.
So he's the guy who also created the show, The Survivor?
He created The Survivor. And it was all as a result of having not done Raid Gauloise. He didn't finish Raid Gauloise. So, yeah, it's a pretty tough thing. And,
Yeah. You mentioned Manchester and Lake District. But it's all pretty cold there and it's raining all the time. So how did you manage to get in some training?
Yeah, good question. It's not raining all the time. It does rain a lot. That's how you get lakes. Yeah. Manchester's not very far away. It's only a couple of hours away. So it's also probably quite cold and whatever. But I was able to find a lake, Ullswater, and subsequently ended up buying a little cottage near there. So I still have that. And my husband and I are going over there for a white Christmas, hopefully, in a few weeks.
Amazing.
A few days. But, yeah, it's a fabulous climbing. In fact, climbing started in the Lake District, which a lot of people don't realise. It was a sport in a place called Nape's Needle was the first recorded, kind of climb. And then it moved to the Alps, and that's when the French got involved with it. So.
That's amazing. I didn't know about that part of the history. I lived in Cardiff, which was a while away, I think two and a half hours away from Manchester. Lake. I've been to Lake District a couple of times, and it was raining really badly on both occasions.
No such thing as bad weather; it's just bad kit, as they will tell you. You've got to have the right clothes and the right attitude. It's hard. It can be tricky, but I was blessed with a lot of very good weather and some beautiful mountain biking routes up there. Just fabulous.
Amazing.
And climbing, of course, and the lake for kayaking. Right. Because in Manchester, I would go around Salford Quays, which is a kind of inner city catchment area for water, in what looked like a plastic bathtub, because that was the only thing I could hire there and, kind of go around. But on Lake Ullswater, there's lovely kayaks to rent. And so I fell in love with Ullswater and actually eventually bought a kayak and kept it there.
Amazing. So you have a house in Manchester, Lake District.
Lake District, yeah. A cottage. It's probably, we shouldn't call it a house, it's a cottage.
Okay. Cool. Wonderful. And then from there, did you see all of this adding up to like taking you somewhere? Like was this all adding up to Everest in any way, or at the back of your mind? Or was that a distant dream at some point and then it sort of vanished?
Yeah. I didn't see it as leading up to Everest, but it absolutely was. Because looking back, there was a very logical progression. I had no exposure to mountains. I think I'd been skiing once in Australia in the snowy mountains. When I moved to Manchester and I was trying to find places to train for this eco challenge, it took me to the Lake District. That took me to climbing, and I really learned to climb in the Lake District in Scotland, which is not very far away from there. And that rock climbing then led me to ice climbing. Along the way, I also did some ski touring. So I learned to ski tour in Scotland. So I would be, kind of out amongst mountains with snow at heights that I'd never seen before. And I much prefer that to skiing. I don't really like being towed up on a kind of a gondola and then skiing down, piste skiing. I'd much rather cross country, ski touring, where you're actually on skis with skins on the bottom of them. So you actually go up. Okay. You can actually go up. It's a very complex thing. I won't go into it, but it's basically they used to be seal skins, so they stop you going backwards. You stick on the bottom of your skis. You take them off when you're coming down again, and you strap your skis down and you go down. Yeah. So I learned to ski.
But how do you go up? Just like climb up with the?
Well, you're skiing. You're kind of like tacking on a boat, but you're going up. So you're going up this way. Okay. So but your skis are such that your heels are raised on them. They're a special type of ski, special type of bindings, and they allow you to. You're still using this kind of like skating motion, if you like, and then you have to do a turn and then come this way. So I did quite a lot of that in Scotland, in the Alps. Yeah, it's actually very good fun. And then, so I was ski touring, I was ice climbing, so I would go. So sometimes we would go rock climbing in Kalymnos in Greece, and then the other times of the year we'd go ice climbing in Ryukyu in Norway, which is where it's also a very famous place, but it only gets sunshine for about 6 months of the year.
Yeah.
And they have beautiful frozen waterfalls. So I did lots of ice climbing on these amazing frozen waterfalls in Ryukyu.
Usually, especially people in the endurance sports, and there are outliers like you, but usually endurance sports enthusiasts don't like to do anything else because the three sports consume all of the time. And we also, resistant to other things, like for example, most of the runners, if somebody would call them to a yoga class and they say, what the hell is going on? And we just like to do our sport. And I know the right way to train is, of course, strength train, yoga, and maybe cross train with other sports. But what's it about you that you found all of these different adventures interesting and you jumped into them?
I think you've answered the question. Adventures, to me it just should always be about adventure. Yes, you want to push your body harder than you can, and just to see how far it can take you. I'm all for doing that, and will continue to do that, because I'm constantly amazed by the human body, and certainly I'm not young. I'm 66, but I feel like I'm still able to do everything I want to do at this stage. It's a touch wood. But that whole sense of adventure. And it's different for various people. So I have a very good friend, Keith Byrne, who is incredibly senior in the North Face. He lived in the Dolomites for many years. He's now living in Boulder. And, great guy. And, seriously senior at the North Face. So to me, adventure is kind of like putting yourself out of your comfort zone a bit and seeing what new things can happen. For him, being out of his comfort zone is putting on a suit and tie and going to a cocktail party, or not even putting on a suit and tie, just going to a cocktail party. Like, he would freak out doing that, and has. I've seen him, kind of feel very uncomfortable. Whereas I'll sign into a cocktail party, so yeah, just because I've had all that business training. So I think, I like to think that I've still got a sense of adventure, and I'd like to think that I'm still going to try and push the envelope and find things that are different, that interest me, that are not just about I have this beef about the Instagram generation. I'm sorry, it's probably about your age, but, this whole thing of doing things just so you can take a snap, a pic or whatever, click a pic. I've just never gotten into. The only reason I do stuff is for me, because I want to see, how far I can push it. Whereas I've seen, not just in this country, but in England as well, possibly less so in Australia, where people go from their first 5K and then they go to a 10K, then they go to a half marathon, and then they go to a marathon, and then they go, what's next? Triathlon. I'm going to tick that box. And then, and that's why triathlon is going to take off here, I'm predicting.
Yeah.
And then the next one is, I'm going to climb Everest, because the mentality is, I'm going to do this to show off. I'm sorry, I shouldn't be quite that strident about it, but there is this whole sense of, I'm doing this so I can take a photograph to show someone that I've done this.
Right.
To me is completely anathema. I don't get it. And what's more dangerous in the case of Everest, because people think it's just a case of being fit, which it so isn't if you're going to climb Everest properly.
Yeah.
Definitely
not. No, you're not going to climb Everest to burn calories for sure. You're not going to get fit.
Well, you'd be surprised how many people I've spoken to who only focus on fitness. How did you get fit? Well, actually, that's not what the point is. The point is, how comfortable are you on the mountains? How comfortable are you wearing crampons? We do know how to, self-arrest with an ice axe. What to do if your fellow climber gets high altitude cerebral edema. How do you react? So a lot of stuff that isn't just.
But the point about this Instagram generation. So you're absolutely right. People do stuff for Instagram so they can get likes and stuff. But isn't that a part of the way our brains have evolved? We've always craved liking from the community. Like, we all want to be admired by people around, and that's some sort of an approval. And I know the outliers who do tend to sort of turn more inwards do not crave this, and probably that's where peace and happiness lies. But yeah, these apps and all this technology is actually just tapping into the way our brains have evolved, right?
I guess, and I think going back to your original point about growing up in the Air Force, I think that whole sense of doing things on your own and enjoying your own company, and that's me. I'm a sample survey of one, but that's kind of why I like doing things, and probably why I like training on my own and doing a lot of stuff on my own.
Yeah,
it's not that I don't like people, and I think I'm generally pretty good around people. It's just I need my own time. I mean, that's why India sometimes drives me a bit crackers, because I like to get away from people, and it's not always easy.
It's not easy.
Anyway, it's a whole other story.
Yeah. But no, there's something about solitude. I think a lot of great thinkers or coaches do talk about solitude quite a bit. They said all the greatness is probably built when you go inwards, and
I think so. And in fact, I made a note when you'd asked me about things, and I did think that's something that's really important, because most of us and most endurance athletes, most people who have that mentality are into doing stuff, not stopping and letting things wash over them, not even celebrating the last win or celebrate properly. Yes, taking lots of photographs and showing the world, but not taking time to work out what that meant for you, what lessons you took from it, what kind of how it's going to change your life, all those sorts of things. And having a bit of quiet time is really important for people. But this society, generally everywhere in the world. I think it's just all about moving on to the next thing. It's all instant. It's all
that, and also I think inputs, like there's so much stimulus around all the time. There's no time for your own thoughts to say anything to you, because even if you're in a queue, you're busy in traffic, you're always consuming content of some kind. You just you have 1 minute to wait for something, you pull out your phone and then you're scrolling in a minute. There's
it's true.
Input all the time, and then there's no time to process anything that you've
and I wonder if it's more so here in India, but because I've been here for 15 years, I can't really tell. It doesn't seem quite as much in England, and I haven't spent enough time in Australia kind of recently to find out. But I mean, I guess it is endemic around the world. But I
it
think
is around the
Indians
world,
because we're early adopters of technology and kind of ownership of smartphones, all that sort of stuff. I think it's
So, since we're on the topic of solitude, what does your solitary time look like? What do you do? Do you write? Do you meditate? What do you do?
Well, funnily enough, I used to meditate a lot more before I came to India. So that's a bit weird because everybody comes to India to meditate. Go and see the Maharishi or whatever.
I thought we were going to teach you meditation.
Yeah, exactly. No, actually, all the things that I had done, the Ironman, I did a lot of meditation leading up to the Ironman, which is how I know that I'd seen myself finishing it. So I knew that, and a lot of positive visualization.
Where did you learn meditation? Sorry to cut you.
Well, I actually had a lovely, I called him my spiritual coach, I called him, but he is a chap called Nash Chase. He's a Maori, born in New Zealand. All his family were Christian missionaries, or Christians at least, and pastors. And he sort of rejected traditional religion, or Christianity, and then started looking at all other different religions and kind of developed his own spirituality. And I found him through a work colleague or kind of work coach who'd said, you probably need to calm down a little bit and spend 15 minutes on your own. I went, how do I do that?
Yeah.
So that's how I found my way to Nash. And, he was brilliant in helping me learn techniques and but also helping me interpret stuff going on in my life and just holding up a mirror and sort of saying, it sounds like, and this was like 1 hour a week, but it was the most valuable hour, I think.
It sounds more like a therapy.
Yeah, it probably was like therapy. He didn't call himself therapist. He was it was very spiritually based though. I mean, he would do things like interpret dreams for you or, talk through, it was therapy. I mean, because he would have techniques like teaching you to see your different versions of yourself around a table and what you would be saying to each other. So there'd be the little girl and there'd be the queen, the Rani, and there'd be the athlete and there'd be the workaholic and there'd be the, little techniques like that. But he was extraordinary. I reached out to him during COVID to just kind of say, hope you're all right. And he is still, kind of there. So that's when I started meditation and a lot of creative visualization, which I still do.
Okay.
So I did before this last half Ironman. But sadly, to your point, life catches up with you. It's all about, going. And I have a lovely meditation teacher here in Nizamuddin. And during lockdown, she was doing twice daily Zoom meditations, which you would think is a bit odd. But she was managed to create this space. At one point, I think she had 400 people from around the world who were tuning into this. And it was the best way of getting through lockdown. Twice a day. They were free. She just did this as kind of a service. Mala Barua, a brilliant woman, and she's been studying meditation and Gyan for 25, 30 years or something.
Yeah. Sorry, what's the name again?
Mala Barua.
Mala Barua.
Yeah.
Okay. In Nizamuddin.
In Nizamuddin, but she does Zoom classes as well. But I know most people go, meditation. Most people like us, people who are ultra athletes and what have you.
Yeah.
But just being able to calm your mind for 15 minutes without thinking about anything, it sounds like it's hard. It is kind of difficult, but I think we make it too difficult for ourselves. Right. It's just sitting for 15 minutes would be a good start for most of us, I think, rather than running around.
Yeah. No, it does sound counterintuitive when you say using technology to do something like look inwards.
Yeah.
But I'm all for it because even with something like an app which is a meditation app, Headspace. So people would go, you're using an app, and purists would say that it's. I did Vipassana meditation, which is the hardcore thing. So I did that 10-day course, and I loved it. It's amazing. Like my friend Keshav also did it very recently.
I'd love to do it. That would be an adventure that I might take up next
It's probably
year.
going to be one of the most challenging things you've done. I mean, despite I'm speaking to an Everester.
I hear you.
Yeah. So, I did that and I came back and then life happened. And because to get into those stages, and initial days, I couldn't do too much meditation. And then when I tried getting into it, it does take you hours to get into that state. And then you're an endurance athlete, you're amateur, but you still have to put in the hours. You have to run, you have to manage a family, and then you also have to probably study a course that you're doing, and then you have a full-time job. How many things are you going to make time for? And I couldn't. So meditation,
that's the one thing you probably should make time for.
Yeah.
And I'd say that as someone who often fails, but it should be the pillar of everything we do. And it doesn't have to be hardcore meditation. It just needs to be quiet time, even prayer. Some people call it meditation, some people call it prayer. Just sitting with some nice bhajans or something is, for 15 minutes is going to be a start to slowing your life down, I think.
Yeah. No, so that's exactly what I'm saying. So meditation got out of my life for many years. And then I came across, so I went for therapy to a psychologist who's a good friend of mine now, and she pointed me towards Headspace, this meditation app.
It's a good app.
Initially I resisted, but then when I got started, it has options for 3 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, and that got me back into meditation. So I started with 3 minutes. On the days I couldn't do anything, I started doing a streak. So 3 minutes was the minimum. And then now I do, I've done a streak of probably 1,000 days without missing a day. And the average probably would be around 8-9 minutes. But then most days it is 10, 15, 20 minutes. And, so it's got me back. And so you have to be open about if technology can help you there. So like you said, it got you through lockdown on those Zoom sessions.
But when Nash was teaching me back in Australia, I've still got the Walkman that I had. Do you remember Walkman? You probably wouldn't remember.
I do.
But I had a grey tape cassette player, Walkman cassette player, and I think I've still got his tape, and I think I've still got the Walkman. I don't think either of them work anymore, but I kept them.
Yeah.
With his voice, taking me through a guided meditation. So same thing as Headspace.
Yeah, same as Headspace. Yeah. Okay. So you do still make time for 15 minutes?
I try.
Okay.
Again, it's this whole, I blame India. I shouldn't, but there are staff around that one didn't have. And I spent a lot of time on my own before I came to India. Met my now husband, and so I went from kind of pretty solitary life for 50 years into being married and being in an Indian household, and how busy they are. There's people always coming and going, and so finding that time is tricky. But when I do get back to it, it's like coming home. I think of it as coming home.
So before we wrap up the point about meditation, just tell me about the visualization that you mentioned.
So for every large event that's happened, large adventure I've had in my life, I have seen myself doing it, and I will use that visualization to make it happen. But what happens along the way is that I couldn't stop myself if I wanted to. Like, I know my life is on that path to do that thing. And it's a weird feeling, but I know that I'm going to be doing it, and I know I'm going to finish it. Yeah, it's almost like once I get into a meditative state, I will think of, I will in my mind imagine what things are going to be like. But then once it's locked in, my life just inextricably kind of works towards.
How do you look at it? So walk me through it. You have an Ironman coming up, or a big event of any kind, and do you do this just a day before the event, or leading up to many days before?
Many days. I mean, for the Ironman, for the first Ironman that I did, it was probably every day for most of that time.
Most of the training time.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
you do this over and over. So you visualize yourself crossing the finish line.
Absolutely.
Well, do you also visualize the stages that you'll be going through? For example, you're fatigued at one point, or not, or is it just
probably don't go through all of that. I mean, I did when I was getting quite serious about like the World Championships and things. There's some very good but probably dated books now around on mental toughness for endurance sports.
Yeah.
In fact, that was the name of one of the books, and I loved it. And I found that intellectually quite interesting, kind of looking at your head and how you can train your head. And sports psychology was a huge thing in Australia before it hit the rest of the world.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, the sort of wins we're now seeing from India and from Britain and from England in the sporting arena, a lot of that's got to do with psychological sports psychology. And I think a lot of that came from Australia, if I could be so bold and, kind of arrogant to say that. But So, yeah, I don't think about the individual stages. I tend to think more of the finish. But, for example, the last triathlon I did, weirdly, I just had this small panic attack a couple of days beforehand in the water, in the open water. Now, for me, I've had them before, not bad panic attacks, but enough to make me stop and, hyperventilate. And it's only ever happened in cold water when I was in England, and I didn't know what had happened to me, but I ended up having a breaststroke out of a, kind of triathlon. And it's a known reflex in cold water where you start to hyperventilate and then you kind of get into this panic mode. And I don't know what got into my head, but I had to actually, this was a few days before the Goa triathlon fairly recently, the 70.3. And I had to get on the phone to Marla, to my meditation teacher, and go, whoa, help me, talk me down through this. So then I would be going through the same sort of visualization of being in the water. And, I made sure the morning of the race I got in the water before everybody else did, to just have a quiet swim to make sure I was going to be calm through the swim. Okay. So, yeah. But, yeah, it's a very important technique, I think, for me, visualization.
Yeah. Okay. So, Everest.
So, as I said before, it was the culmination of, without me knowing, a logical progression of rock climbing, then ice climbing, then spending time in the mountains ski touring. Then I went to the Alps to do some mountaineering itself, the French Alps around Chamonix. And then after that, I got the job in Delhi, but hadn't moved here yet. And it took a long way, maybe 12, 18 months for that contract to be negotiated with my Australian boss. So then in December of the year before I came to Delhi, I climbed Amadablam, and that's one of the mountains that people climb as in a climb site in a lead up to Everest. And then 3 years later, I find myself at sea level in Delhi working like a maniac again for that was a whole adventure in itself, working for the Commonwealth Games. That needs a whole other podcast.
2010 Commonwealth Games.
Correct. I came here at the end of 2007 to work on that. So in November 2007, I did Amadablam. I stopped within 200 meters, even if it was of the top. And you'd asked me about failures, and I suppose if one was ever going to have a failure, that would have been it. But it was actually a conscious choice not to go to the top. And I think it was possibly the wrong choice. I was in a group of 4 people, 2 of whom were not traveling very well. Another chap who ended up being on the Everest trip with me also, he was going very well, and I was doing pretty okay. But I knew that if I went to the final pitch for the last 200 meters through these ice flutes, that the other 2 were going to follow me. They were going to come with me. And I could see that the Sherpa was feeling very uncomfortable about that happening, our guide. And so I said, look, I'm happy to wait here. I'll stay with, I can't even remember their names, and Partha Day went and summited and then came back down. And the reason why I didn't want to push it was because I'd probably read too many Everest stories of people, sort of pushing themselves too hard, being stuck on the top of the mountain. In fact, we had plenty of time in the afternoon to get up and down, but I didn't really realize that at the time. My mind was on my next new adventure in Delhi, moving to India. So I don't think of it as a failure, a bit of unfinished business maybe, but not a failure. So that was a logical lead up to Everest. And in my mind, I was thinking, okay, I'm living in Delhi. It's just down the road. I will train for this. And of course, the reality of the Commonwealth Games kicked in, and I virtually did nothing. I was hardly even doing any training, any swimming, any, kind of anything physical. I was so tied up in work. And then towards the end of 2010, just as the Games was finishing up, I was contacted by the chap who organised the Amadablam, the expedition leader for Amadablam, and he said he was organising an Everest expedition that year, which he'd postponed from the year before. Would I like to go? And I sort of jumped out and thought, now is the time. Yeah. So it wasn't the best build-up in terms of training, but over the years I'd had the sort of the conditioning, I suppose, and also the knowledge of ropes and, kind of high altitude. But that said, I was still very uncertain, very green by the time we got to Everest. I was still, kind of needed to remind myself about crampon work and abseiling and those sorts of things.
So you were pretty rusty by the time you got to that point.
Yeah. And also it wasn't helped by the other part of my training, which was, so Rajiv and I got engaged in just around the Commonwealth Games time, got married in a civil ceremony here in Delhi. And then that was in November, and then got married in the Lake District in the little cottage I was telling you about, the church down the road from there, in December of 2010. In fact, December 22nd. And so most of the sort of Commonwealth Games time and the lead up to it, I was involved in trying to organise a wedding as well as winding down the Commonwealth Games work that we've been doing. And then trying to think about how on earth I was going to get to Everest. So anyway, at the end of December 2010, I then joined my fellow Everest expeditioners in Scotland for a week's training. So I sort of packed away my wedding dress and picked up my crampons and my roughy-tufty clothes and went off to Scotland to do some, kind of training in Scottish winter conditions, which was very good training for Everest. I should say I suffer from altitude sickness, which is a really bizarre thing for someone to say who's summited Everest. But it actually kicks in at 2,500 meters exactly above sea level, which is lower than the average ski slope, lower than, Missouri, I think, is at about, 1,800 meters or something. Rishikesh, around Rishikesh, some of those mountains are well over 2,500 meters. So you can pretty well set your altimeter by me. I'll just kind of start throwing up. So I knew I needed longer to acclimatise. So I did the Annapurna circuit as a trek, just very early in the season on my own with one guide.
The circumference of Annapurna.
So there's a trek that goes around. It's a 21-day trek that takes in all of the three Annapurnas and Dhaulagiri, and you kind of get to see all of those. But you're at a relatively high altitude, but not so high that I'd get sick. So I did that, and then rather than flying straight from Kathmandu to Lukla, which is what most people do, and then start trekking from there up to base camp, I walked in from Jiri, which is the old roadhead that was taken by people like Bonington or even Edmund Hillary and Tenzing Norgay. So that's very seldom used now, and it's a beautiful trek. It's like a 10-day trek. So I had 3 weeks and then 10 days of this lovely trek, arrived at Lukla, met up with everybody else, and then we went off on another 3-week acclimatization trek to get to know each other, to also work out how we gelled as a team, to get some altitude in our system. So by the time we arrived at base camp, we were already acclimatized. We'd already done a 6,000-meter peak as part of our acclimatization. And we'd avoided all the tea houses of trekkers and stuff on the way up, which is what our expedition leader wanted us to do. So many germs in that whole, kind of Sol Khumbu area with all the trekkers coming in and out. And so we were able to avoid all of that. So we arrived nicely acclimatized, which meant we had less trips through the icefall, and that's known to be the most dangerous part of the Everest climb.
The Khumbu icefall.
The Khumbu icefall, correct, yeah.
So, we had interviewed Colonel Romil Barthwal. I'm not sure if you've heard of him. He's an endurance athlete and an Everester. So last week I spoke with him right here, and so he told us there are different camps. Like regular folks haven't been there, and we've only seen the movie Everest, and the only thing I remember from the movie is being shit scared. But that's all I remember.
Yeah, funnily enough, I was too when I saw the movie.
Yeah.
Afterwards. So you mean the most recent Everest movie? Because I was looking at it.
There are two Everest movies.
There's several. There's the original IMAX movie, which was being shot at the time that the 1996 disaster was happening. Okay. And that's when David Breshears, he and his film crew actually went up to try and rescue Rob Hall. When that original disaster happened. But they were filming it for IMAX, for the big screen. So the current movie actually uses some of that footage, which, because I was blown away, I thought, okay, they've either gone to Everest and shot this, or else, how have they done it? And then I found out they did a lot of green screen filming and then brought in the original Everest film, kind of the footage.
Okay.
There's lots of camps and acclimatization, and yes, being shit scared. So it all brought it back to me. It all became a bit, when I went to that movie, dragged along by some friends of mine who are also mountain lovers here in Delhi, But I was looking at it going, and you know that feeling in the pit of your stomach where you go, I really don't want to be here.
Yeah.
And it all brought it back to me.
So you've already done the visualization. You've seen yourself.
Yeah, that I had more or less.
And that sort of pretty much like confirms to you, like in your head, it sort of gives you the confidence that if you visualized it, then it's definitely happening.
Yeah, exactly. The only slight problem with that was I'd never been to the top of Everest, so I didn't know what it looked like. And frankly, didn't have the time to do the sort of research I should have done. So I didn't even really understand the topography as we were doing it. And that's my bad. You know, when we got to the Geneva Spur, when we got to the Hillary Step, you know, all these sorts of things, when we got to the South Summit, I really didn't understand where we were going, what we were doing. Anyway, I can tell you about the night of the summit night, which is kind of interesting. Do you want me to?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So you go up through these various progressions. You go to Camp 1, you come back down. You go up to Camp 2, you come back down. You come up to Camp 3, come back down. We were at Camp 3 when a bad weather warning came through, and rather than go back down to Camp 2 or base camp like most of the rest of the teams did, we stayed at Camp 3 and the next day went up to the South Col to Camp 4 and chose to stay all of that day and all of that night and all of the next day. So normally what happens is you would go from the Camp 3 to the South Col, you would arrive mid-afternoon, you'd hydrate, you'd eat, and then that evening you leave at about 9:30, whatever, for your final summit push. Most people don't understand you do it at night. They think it's all done during the day.
Right.
So we chose to go up and stay there knowing that we couldn't summit that night. So we had 2 days, if you like, in the death zone. As it turned out, it was 3 days, but that's a whole other story. And so that we had a whole afternoon, evening with 5 of us in the one tent, you know, kind of in our underwear because it was so hot inside the tent, even though it was like minus whatever outside. It was
How
really
was it hot?
It's so hot in those tents because the sun's beaming down on you.
Oh.
And in fact, this is the other thing. My husband finds it really amusing. You'd start out at base camp to go through the icefall. Yeah. So you're wearing, you know, it's minus 20 or so, and you're wearing your down suit or just, you know, layers. By the time you get to Camp 2, so Camp 2 is in a coombe, which is the Western word, as you probably remember from your time in Cardiff, for valley. So it's this huge bowl, if you like, and the sun beams down on that bowl, and it's got nowhere to go, and it bounces up it's coming down on you, it's bouncing up from the snow. It's so hot. So by the time it can get up to 40 degrees. So I could have been in a bikini top walking through Camp 2, from Camp 2 to Camp 3. I wasn't because you don't want to get sunburned and it's a very hard race, but it's so hot. So yes, even in a tent on the South Col, it gets very hot because 5 of you generating body heat. There's sun coming in the tent.
Wow, that's something very new. Like I've never heard of it.
It's kind of a reality. So anyway, we're sitting there, and then that night we all went to did our summit push. I was talking about the fact that I really didn't understand the geography very well, the topography.
Yeah.
So I decided to leave an hour earlier because I was 10 years older than everybody else on the team and I didn't want to hold anyone up.
How old were you then?
I was 56. 54, I think, at the time.
Okay.
54. So I set out, and there was a expedition of Japanese climbers ahead of me, I found out afterwards. And all I could see was this line of lights going virtually straight up. It looked like straight up. And they were going really slowly. And what you don't want to do is go slowly on summit night because you can get very bad cold hands, feet, whatever. So anyway, the Sherpa that I was with, Padawa, wanted me to unclip from the rope and to overtake some of these Japanese and keep going. Yeah. And I'm just looking at him going, you've got to be kidding me. My life depends on this rope. Yeah. I've seen how steep it is. Now, looking back, the balcony, that rope leading up to the balcony is not as steep as you imagine, but all I could see was, kind of headlights, very steep. And I'm sufficiently agora to think if I'm going to overtake someone, I don't, I want to be able to keep going, not go, like holding them up, kind of is. So good manners like that. So I said, no, I'm not going to. Anyway, he was not best pleased about that. And so there was a bit of tension and friction going on between dear Padau and me. But, in the end, having a bit more of an idea of the topography would have been quite helpful, and a bit more time to research. And as I said, that's my bad, but it was all a bit of an interesting adventure, learning how all these things happen. So,
yeah. And then you did overtake some of them, or you just went along with them?
In the end, they stopped for a while at the balcony, which is this place where the oxygen
Such a funny
cylinders are
name for
cached.
something on
I know,
Everest.
it's weird. And I said to a good mate, Kenton Cool, who's now summited 16, 18, 20 times or something, I said, why is it called the balcony? And he said, you'll see when you get there. But it is actually like a balcony. It's literally, you go up like this, and there's just a flat spot, and then you turn left. There's lots of turning left on Everest. Like you get up through the south face, and then the Lhotse face, and you turn left, and then go over the Geneva spurs. So there's lots of that turning left. Anyway, there's the balcony, and so we had stopped to update the oxygen canisters, and there was I probably shouldn't tell you this, but there's a guy sitting in the snow, and I sort of clocked him, sort of saw him, but didn't really. And I should have done, because he had his arm, kind of stretched out. And what I should have noticed was he didn't have a glove on his arm. But he's sort of sitting in the snow, and I just keep going. And some of the Japanese had stopped there. So I there's lots of overtaking people on the mountain as long as you're not on the rope directly. So anyway, I found out afterwards that he was a Japanese climber. It was his third attempt, and sadly he was dead. But I didn't know that at the time. And he was one of but they brought him down the same time we were descending.
They did, because a lot of them just don't.
They do on the south side, and that's why the difference between the north side and the south side, it's much safer to climb on the south side, because you can be brought down, even if you're unwell, much higher on the mountain than you can on the north side. Once you get to the ladders on the north side, there's no hope of really getting someone down. So it costs less to do the north side, but that's only a minor reason. For me, it was safety on the south side.
Right.
So anyway, keep going the balcony, and then we got to the south summit. And to your point about, kind of visualization and knowing you're going to get there, the Sherpas are paid to sort of get you to the top and get you down as quickly as possible. That's their job, because they don't want people loitering. I get that. So he was, as I said, not best pleased that I wouldn't overtake the Japanese, and I was kind of in my own world a bit there. And suddenly, out of nowhere, I'm at the south summit, and I'd stopped for 2 seconds. He's yelling in my ear, because there's a lot of noise around. The other thing people don't tell you, with the oxygen, there's so much noise because you can hear yourself breathing. So he's yelling in my ear, "What are you going to get? You can't stop here. You've got to keep going." He goes, okay, just, kind of calm it down. Because I knew I was going to make it. And I was on the final approach, and there was a woman on the rope in front of me, and she stopped dead. And there's only like 30 meters between her and the summit. And I'm just thinking, please, will you keep moving? And her shoulders were going up and down like this. I thought, was she having a laugh, or, what's happening? It turned out she was the oldest Indian woman to summit ever up to that point. And she was having a bit of a moment, a bit of an emotional moment. But she was stopped on the rope right in the middle of. So anyway, I did actually unclip from the rope and overtake her, because it was on pretty flat ground. And then getting to the top, you had asked me previously what that felt like, and I was just grateful. I was just grateful to have gotten there, really wanted to get down, had thought to myself on the way up, you're an idiot, Susan. You've just gotten married to the world's loveliest man. You didn't want to get married, but, you found Mr. Right, and you're at risk of, kind of killing yourself on a big mountain like this. And up until that point, I hadn't been particularly worried about dying. It's one of those things where, whatever. And I suddenly thought, I'm going to be ripped off of some of the best years of my life if I don't make it down from here. So I just wanted to, kind of get down. And the people, we were a very eclectic bunch. Like the same Partha Day, who had been on Amadablam with me, unbeknownst to me, had in his day pack, a plastic iron and a fold-out ironing board made of cardboard. And he's there ironing on the top of Everest. So he was wanting to win the Extreme Ironing Award. Apparently it's a thing. People do it under the sea. They do it, in the weirdest places, hanging off buildings. Extreme ironing. It's a challenge. It's like, I'm not going to comment. But Partha's over there. The expedition leader was in tears, doing a piece to camera, because he'd actually, also unbeknownst to me, brought a canister of ashes from a boy who'd been killed in an avalanche in Scotland, and he'd taken his ashes on behalf of his parents, and he was being emotional, so he was crying. My flatmate Jen, the only other girl on the expedition, she was sobbing, and she was pointing to the ground, and I've got no idea why she's crying. And apparently she had just buried a ring that her soon-to-be fiancé had given her as a friendship ring, and he'd passed away in a motorbiking accident, kind of just 6 months before this. So there's all this drama going on the mountain. Then you've got the Sherpas in you trying to get off, don't tread on those prayer flags. I'm trying not to, but there's a space this big on the top of Everest. There's prayer flags everywhere and not a lot of space. So tiptoeing around that, and you're saying, right, we've got to get down, So, okay. So I was so, kind of fazed by the whole thing that I don't even have a photograph of me on the summit without my goggles on. I was absolutely terrified of snow blindness. So the only photographs of me are, kind of wisp of blonde hair and snow goggles that I can say is me. But we came down and we sort of took a group decision that we would stay another night in the so-called death zone, which didn't seem to bother us. None of us died. But the weird thing was you lose so much weight on Everest. We were talking about, kind of diets and things earlier. And your body just eats itself above 7,000 meters. It just that's why they call it the death zone. And I'm walking down. So we'd stayed that night so that's 3 nights we'd had at the South Col. And I'm walking down. I've got a buff. A buff, it's a stretchy piece of material you use to stop the cold and what have you. And all I could smell was nail polish remover. And I think to myself, what idiot is doing their nails on Everest? Because that's how you mind that you do get a little bit, sort of scatty on Everest. Anyway, it turned out it was actually me that I was smelling, that because when your body goes into ketosis, it actually smells of formaldehyde. That's kind of that smell of nail polish remover. So my body was literally eating itself up as I was kind of going down. And my husband always jokes that my wife went to Everest and only 90% of her came back. Because I kind of shrunk quite a bit. So it's quite a good diet if you really want to lose weight, but I don't recommend it.
I always say this as a joke, like you don't climb Everest to lose weight, but then you clearly can.
You can. Yeah, if the most extreme diet in the world, that one, go and climb Everest. I don't recommend it.
Yeah. But on the summit, it's just so heavy. All the things that you're telling me, it's insane. So, people with so much baggage do these things for their loved ones, for their...
It is quite an emotional thing. I didn't have the epiphany that people talk about because I was also trying to keep sensible about how much time I was spending there, getting down again and seeing all the other, kind of emotion going on around me. I thought, someone better keep the act together here. Yeah, I didn't have, people say, what was it like on the top of Everest? It was incredible to have done that. The views weren't great. I mean, it wasn't like there was a wonderful panorama. But as I said, I was just grateful that I'd gotten there, grateful that, I had a body that would allow me to do that. But more importantly, grateful that God had said, we've let you get to the top of the mountain. Hopefully we're going to let you get back down again because, as they say, the mountain's only half climbed. When you're at the summit, you've got to get all the way down.
Yeah. But what is it about people doing these, like a couple of examples you gave of people who submitted for somebody else to bury that ring or stuff like that? Why do you think people do that? Like, your reason wasn't anything like that, but why do you think people do that?
Well, I don't think that was the reason they were doing it, to be fair. I think Jen was a climber. She's a very good climber. She summited Cho'oyu a couple of years before. She's a very good, she lived in Chamonix, actually, so she climbed a lot around Chamonix. So, no, it was just an emotional moment for her, and I hadn't understood. She hadn't ever mentioned the fact that, about this motorcycle accident and how he'd been killed. And the expedition leader, I guess, he was doing it for commercial reasons, I suppose, but also he's quite an interesting character, and it would have been just, he was doing it as a favour for the mother of the boy who'd been killed in the avalanche. So it wasn't the driving factor. Why Partha would choose to go and iron on top of Everest is only Partha could answer that question, but it's kind of truly bizarre. But we all made it down safely, and remarkably, we all summited on the same day. Normally you wouldn't get 5 climbers who are similar kind of abilities or have been able to summit on the same day through luck or circumstance or anything else.
Okay. Yeah, wonderful. So 4 days in the death zone, and then you come back down. So 3 days, sorry. But during all of this, like you mentioned, you had married just before this biggest expedition of your life, and you did at some point fear that you might, lose the best years of your life. So before leaving for Everest, what did you tell Rajiv? Like, were you aware, and was this in a conversation, or was this like unspoken that, let's be fair, not everybody comes back?
That's very true. And I was telling someone this just the other day. My way of dealing with that was to refuse to let him pay for me to go to Everest. So I paid for the whole thing out of my own money because in the back of my mind, I'm thinking if something happened to me, I would never want him to think that he'd facilitated it. You know what I mean? It's a silly thought, but it was important to me that I kind of made that break. So we had I knew I would come back. I knew I ultimately deep inside I knew I'd come back. It's just that there were way too many times, like when you're crossing the crevasse on ladders, shaky ladders, and there's no one else around you because you're climbing on your own at that stage. Other people are you're different times leaving and coming on the mountain, and I'm thinking, okay, so if I fall off the ladder here, there's not even other expeditions around me. There's no Sherpa. Fall off. I'm not going to die because I'm clipped onto the rope. But it's not a hard side of the ladder. It's just the ladder and two ropes that are tethered either side. And the way that you have to tension the rope is to lean forward. So you're leaning forward over the crevasse, walking along where your crampons, these metal spikes, are having to negotiate the rungs of a Chinese-made ladder, which is not looking particularly, kind of substantial for where I. So you do that enough times, you think, oh. I really don't want another ladder. So,
those ladders look really, really scary, especially in movies.
The first time you do it. It's,
wonderful. So, and you came back down safely, and it was great.
Yeah.
And then, so since Everest, since 2010, what have you been up to? What have you been doing?
Well, Rajiv, my husband, forbade me from climbing any more big mountains, so which was kind of fair because we had gone radio blackout for 3 days, so the other groups didn't know when we were going up the mountain to try and avoid the sort of lines that you see of people all going through the same weather window, going for the same weather window. So when he didn't know what was happening to me for 3 days, he kind of flipped a bit and he said, no more. And I thought, yeah, that's fair. And my mother, as I think we were saying before, like she really couldn't understand. And it was the first time I've heard her actually, kind of her voice was wavering and she was nearly in tears. And I said, Mum, it's okay, I've come back and I've got all my fingers and toes intact. And I knew I'd really gone too far this time. It was just, I'd pushed the envelope too far for her liking. So anyway, I'm back to sea level and I thought, oh, what's an adventure I haven't done at sea level? So I signed up for the Marathon des Sables, which is, as you are aware, it's a race across the desert for 7 days and carrying your own gear and everything except water. They give you the tents. And that was just an extraordinary experience. I cried at the last checkpoint. Wow. I didn't want to finish. It was just so fabulous, one foot after the other, just and totally, like you drank so much water and had all these salt tablets and you were still drinking lots of water. And yet it was lovely, dry, clean air. And I've never felt cleaner in my life, despite the sweating and everything else in the 50-degree heat. But that was a great adventure and I really loved doing that.
Talk us through a little bit about MDS because I think somebody in Gurgaon recently finished it. Mahashweta Ghosh, a friend of ours in the running circuit, she just recently done it. And quite a few of the runners, because runners transition to longer distances and those who've done 100 kilometers and longer tend to feel that a marathon a day for 7 days is probably not that big a challenge. But in those conditions, it is. Do you want to talk us through a little bit about what's it like?
Well, certainly in training terms, you can't train for more than a marathon. I mean, that's just a given in a human body. If you start trying to train 40 kilometers a day is dumb, but you train, up to as if you're going to be running a marathon. The biggest challenge is the double day. So there's one day where you do 80 kilometres, 82 kilometres, and that's after you've already done. So not every day is also 40 kilometres, by the way. Some days I think one day was 34, one day may have been whatever it was. But the 80 kilometre day or 80 plus, I think it was 82, 83, you get 2 days to do it. So the quicker you come into the tent, back to where the cab has been struck, or set up, then the quicker you get, the more rest you get. So I chose to keep going, whereas a lot of people will stop at one of the intermediate checkpoints and sleep, rest, carry on. They also quite often stop in the middle of the day, which I'm fine with, and I guess maybe my acclimatization living in Delhi. But I know all the Brits stopped in the middle of the day, so I know they lost at least 2 or 3 hours waiting for the sun to go down a bit. To your point about, can you train for it? Is it hard? It's, as a runner, probably not hard. I don't mind the heat. And in the valleys between the dunes, it got down to about 50 degrees. I mean, it got up to 50 degrees. But normally you don't feel that hot because there's always a breeze blowing because you're normally up a bit higher, you're not in the dunes themselves. I was a bit surprised how few dunes there were. They actually just have one day in the dunes.
Okay.
Most of it is hard-packed soil, like sandy soil, and the rest of it's, there's one day that's the big mountain, the Jebel, and that's climbing up, and it's got ropes and, coming up and coming down. But otherwise, no, I think it's fair to say that it's not the hardest thing I've ever done. It's one of the most enjoyable. Morocco is so beautiful.
Great. And this was, what year did you do MDS?
2013.
Okay.
So 10 years ago now.
Yeah, 10 years already,
Yeah,
right? And you recently did Goa 70.3. Was there anything in between? Oh.
I was spending a lot of time setting up my business and running it, my swim teaching business and aqua fitness. And then, so I really wasn't thinking too much other than keeping, things ticking over. There are about 12 different routes, which are the ancient pilgrimage routes to Santiago de Compostela. And it's theoretically where St. James's head fetched up on a beach in Spain. And so people would come from, so the two main pilgrims routes are either to Rome or to Santiago de Compostela. It's the far northwest of Spain.
Okay.
And so it's an 850 kilometre route, depending on which one you do.
Okay.
And so I did, my friend and I, again, it's something I've wanted to do since I was about 40 or so, 35. Mm-hmm. I'd read about it in a friend's room. She had a book on it, and I was reading. I thought, oh, that sounds amazing. And I was going to do it for my 40th birthday, and then life caught up. So I ended up doing it for my 65th birthday, I guess it was. Yeah, 65th birthday last year. Mm-hmm. So I did one last year. I've done two small ones this year.
That's a cycling thing.
No, that's actually walking. So you carry everything on your back, everything.
850 kilometers.
So it's a month's walk, but you have to carry everything on your back if you're going to do it as a proper pilgrim. So you wash your clothes every night. You get into a routine of just walking 1 foot. So you're doing 30, 35 k's a day, depending on.
Wow! And how many days?
It was 30.
30 days.
Yeah, the first one we did, which was two put together. It was the Del Norte and the Primitivo. Okay. And then the two this year, two smaller ones, were part of what we didn't do on the Del Norte. And then it was another one, which is all the lighthouses on the far north of what they call the Death Coast in Spain. Okay. And that's spectacular and beautiful, but quite tough, like really tough. This coming year, I'm doing another Camino, which is the route of Via de la Plata, which is just cycling. So it's 1,000 kilometres from Seville to Gijón. So it's the far south of Spain to the far north.
Oh. And that's a walk?
No, that's a ride. That's a cycle ride. There's 1,000 k's.
Okay. So what is it about doing hard things that keeps you hooked to adventure? Like seeking one after another and all different kinds.
Interesting. I don't know that I'm hooked in the sense that I'm happy to always pivot if things don't turn out, like life circumstances won't allow me to do something. I'm not so obsessive, I think, these days that I have to do that thing. And I don't do them because they're hard. I actually do them because they're adventures, and they turn out to be different levels of hardness. I have a really lovely running buddy, OP Pandi, known as Pandi G in our small running community. And he and I have spent hours and hours running around Sanjeevan, around the park there, solving the problems of the world. And just generally, he helped me with the Marathon des Sables training, as did our other friend whom you know, Moed Oberoi. So Pandiji pointed out to me one day, he said, you've got an incredible capacity for discomfort. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, for most foreigners, you don't mind going to Indian toilet, you don't mind going to, I said, well, no, why would I? It doesn't even enter my mind. But I suppose there's a lot of people for whom creature comforts are important, for having, a hairdryer or don't get me wrong, I love having my hairdryer when I need to, but I'm able to disassociate myself from a lot of things, which is not to say I don't feel pain. I mean, I avoid pain and discomfort where I can, but if I have to, I don't see it as a hardship. As I said, I don't think I'm drawn to things just because they're hard, just because it's a tick box of, I have to do this to prove that I'm, harder than the next person. It's just more things that appeal to me because they've got a sense of adventure and because I'll be able to look back on it going, yeah, I was able to do that. That was, and I've pushed myself out of my comfort zone. I've gone to that cocktail party I didn't want to go to if I was a, kind of roughy-tufty adventure athlete. It's just that seeing what else the human body can do within safe parameters.
That's amazing. But you've mentioned in this entire conversation, I've not heard too many of failures. And I want to know, how do you deal with failures? But I don't see you have had too many. But how does somebody not have failures? Who gets through without failures? It could be maybe not in adventure sports, maybe in personal life. Have you gone through some of the toughest moments, and how did you sort of navigate those?
I suppose, yes, I can't, apart from not finishing at Dublin, which I don't believe was a failure. I took a decision and I'm comfortable with that decision. I guess most recently, I just came back from a cycling tour of Sri Lanka for a 9-day cycling tour with friends. And part of it was in a very, very rough, not rough, but tough part of what they call the Knuckles National Park. And there was 10 kilometres of switchback. And I had taken my pedals, SPD pedals and cleats, which for those who don't know, your feet are locked into the pedals.
Yeah.
And so you have to make a conscious effort to get your foot out. Also, people may not know that if you're on a very steep incline, once you lose momentum, the bike starts to tip over and you're not quite sure which way the bike's going to go, and it's very hard to get your foot out of the pedal. So, after a couple of times of thinking, oh my God, I'm going to come off, and I got out of the pedal, had to push the bike, start walking. After a couple of kilometres of this, I thought, I don't want to be doing this for 10 kilometres. I could see the topo on the route description. So I jumped in the bus. And I hated myself for it, like really hated myself. And that's as close as I get to a failure. And, you get to the end, it was raining and, kind of everybody's really happy that they got to the top of it. Well, not everyone, because not everybody, a few other people jumped in the bus as well. But, that mindset, I suppose, of, okay, I started to do something and I didn't finish it, that I find very distressing. And it very seldom happens to me. So then the next day, I didn't use my cleats and my cycling shoes. I just used normal running shoes and was able to do the 10 kilometres, the next switchback of 10 kilometres, kind of relatively easily. So I was able to get that monkey off my back, as it were. Yeah. But that's, I don't normally react that way. I was really actually quite upset. I was like, why I wasn't able to do it, and everyone else was having fun, and we did it. But otherwise, I try, because of this visualization that we talked about, I think I always know that I'm going to finish something. I always know I'm going to get there. So,
but I'm surprised you aren't in this place, this mindset too often, because everybody was trying to do something out of their comfort zone, and I'm pretty sure the Ironman and everything was out of your comfort zone at the time. And when you're, let's say, in the middle of a 180-kilometer ride, there will be moments when you're really like out of gas, or you want to sort of give in.
Not once in the Ironman. Wow. I was having a ball. But I was putting no pressure on myself. I wasn't looking for a good time. I just wanted to finish. And that's the best advice I always give to people doing their first triathlon. Never aim for a podium finish. Never do what some of my girlfriends did this year, which was to do a half Ironman without ever having done another triathlon. You've got to kind of pay your dues in some of these things. And I had, but perhaps not with the Ironman, because I'd done, only a mini triathlon and then kind of jumped in. But everybody else I would say to just take it easy. Just finish your first triathlon. And literally, I loved it. I loved every minute of it. It's a bit like Marathon Sabre. I had no expectations whatsoever of that. And I ended up coming fourth in my age group, and, there were a lot of people who didn't finish, and I think I did quite well. I was in the top third of both men and women because I had no pressure. I didn't, I like to just see how things unfold. I'm not generally, unless, as I said, that period when I was really training and focusing on Olympic distance triathlons and trying to get faster, and that was a very different mindset where I was pressurizing myself. But even then, I wouldn't see it as a failure if I didn't meet the time that I wanted. It's just like, okay, that's the time I did. But in work, funnily enough, there have been a couple of times where I have felt like the Commonwealth Games here were particularly hard time for me for a bunch of reasons. I didn't feel like a failure, but I do know that if I had done the right thing if I had followed my instincts, I probably should have resigned and forced my Australian boss to withdraw, because I could see where it was heading, and he knew and I knew that I'm the sort of person that just hangs in there. And he was hanging in there waiting for things to get better, and they never did. So, that company ended up being owed US $17 million in fees, which they never got. And I was, kind of responsible for managing it, but I kept saying, please get your money out now, but they never did. It was probably not a failure, but it was certainly an incident in my life where I've dwelled on it more than most other things. That's a shame. But otherwise, no, I'm pretty positive in life, actually. I'm one of those terribly annoying people who sees the glass half full and everything.
Yeah, but learning to trust your instincts, that comes naturally to you? Or it's always been the case?
No, and I think for a lot of women it doesn't come naturally. I think we have it sort of beaten out of us just societally. I think it's a systemic thing.
Mm-hmm. But in your sport, how did you train yourself to sort of trust in yourself or your instincts more?
Here's the thing. Most ultra-endurance athletes don't trust themselves. They push themselves beyond their comfort zone. Every instinct would tell you that God didn't mean you to run a marathon, let alone an ultra-marathon. Yeah. It's not right.
Right.
But you learn to override all of those instincts, I think, don't you? I think most people do, because that's the only way you get to the end goal. Yeah. I mean, it'd be nice to just pull up a chair and have a nice cup of coffee and go, I'm really over this now. But you don't. You just keep going.
Right.
So I'm pretty good now, I think. I would never, like in the last half Ironman I did, it was so hot. And I was cramping after the bike. I was cramping on the run for a bunch of reasons. But even if I'd wanted to push myself, I probably couldn't have done, because every time I started to run, it really cramped. Mm. But I also was never going to push myself in that heat because it was ridiculously hot in Goa. So to that extent, I will listen to my instincts. And I never do anything without proper training and without proper safety. And you asked me the question, I'd said a couple of times in talks that I've given, sink or swim. That's the lesson I learned. Well, that's rubbish. And that's really flippant. And if I could take it back, I would, because as a swimming instructor, that is not the way you teach children to swim. You would never, ever, ever throw them in water. There's so many people I teach now who as adults are scarred for life because that's the way they've been taught to swim. They were thrown in the water. I mean, you just never do that. Right. And sink or swim is not my philosophy.
Okay.
But I've always had fabulous coaches. I've always sought out coaches whenever I learn something new, and I've learned lots of new sports over the years. I mean, mountain biking, the age of 45 was the first time I think I got on a mountain bike. Mm-hmm. Kayaking, whatever it is, I will always triathlon. Way back then, I had a triathlon coach, I had a cycling coach, I had a running coach. So, I like to do things properly and planned and structured, and sometimes I'll, kind of throw it all out the window, but most of the time it's pretty structured.
Amazing. I mean, just something we discussed earlier, but we didn't talk about, particularly delve into your transition to India.
Uh-huh.
What was that like, and how's it been?
Well, there's a Shakespearean line that says it was the best of times and the worst of times. It was the best of times because I met my husband 2 weeks after I arrived. Mm-hmm. So that has been a huge plus in my life, probably the biggest plus in my life. But it was also Commonwealth Games. I was thrown here with no support. I was the only one from an Australian sports marketing company who was sent here on my own. There had been no real preparation. One chap had come and gone, from Australia over the course of the negotiation of the contract for 18 months, but he wasn't based here. I had no cultural training. I had no Hindi training. I had no expectations other than I had done the same job for the Manchester Commonwealth Games several years, 8 years before that. And so I kind of knew what I was doing there, which was a bit unfortunate because I also then was able to show up the people who were also, let's face it, a bit corrupt. No, very corrupt. So, I was right in the line of fire, and it was an extraordinary thing to me, because Australians are all bright and shiny, and you get in there and you do your job, and, if you do your job properly, everything happens. Oh, no. So the way of doing business in this organisation was gobsmacking. Mm. And, I would daily be beside myself. And I wake up in tears, and I used to say to people, they'd say, oh, so, what age were you? I said, oh, you must have been going through menopause. And I said, probably, but I didn't know if I was waking up in tears because I was menopausal or just because I was so distressed and so depressed about working for this bunch of crooks. But anyway, it was quite interesting. But despite all of that, there would be occasions I'd look back on those first couple of years and there would be a camel walking down or a bindo marg and I'd be going, that's great. Or a couple of elephants and their mahouts going down. You don't see those things anymore, sadly. Yeah. And Delhi, India has changed a lot in the 15 years that I've been here. Yeah. But so I found it really difficult having people in my face all the time. Firstly, Australians have a higher need for personal space than anybody else in the world. We need 2.5 feet around us, right? Don't come in the middle of my 2.5 feet.
Are we too close?
Oh, way too close. No, I'm only joking. But you can imagine I'm in a queue and there's somebody pushed up against me this way, someone pushing me back this way. And it just freaks me out. Less so now. And then the noise. I'd come from living in the little cottage in the Lake District where I had stayed after the Commonwealth Games over there. Where it was quiet, hardly suddenly I'm in Delhi, there's noise and people and traffic and honking horns and, colour and movement and everything else.
Yeah.
I found that...
Too much stimulus.
Too much stimulus. I found that really hard to cope with. And then just living, kind of going straight into a marriage here and then an Indian household where there's staff around, which I'm totally not used to. And albeit we don't have much staff, we have one housekeeper, but... just there's always someone in the house or a Mali coming through. That I found quite hard. But it's also the upside, because the thing I find I like most about India is the people and the relationships I've made here and the incredible kind of naivety in some ways, kind of lack of cynicism by a lot of my Indian friends. Not so Mohit Oberoi. He's so cynical. Sorry, Mohit. But he's also a honey. But do you know what I mean? People are willing. I always say to people that Indians are the most adventurous people I know, partly because you've got no sense of danger, no governor that says, oh, I shouldn't do this because I might kill myself. I mean, people just go and do stuff without
what makes you think that? Because of the way traffic runs?
No, well, there is that, and I drive in Delhi, but and cycle through Delhi streets. Yeah. There is a sense of that's more malicious. I think that's more I've got to get in there and I've got to be. I don't like that. No, I'm often reminded of this woman I saw on a jet ski in Goa. And she was on the beach and she's in a salwar kameez and she's got a buoyancy vest on and she's obviously never been anywhere near a wave in her life or the ocean or anything else. And she's on this jet ski and before the guide or instructor, whatever he is, could even jump on the back, she's already taken off on this thing. And I'm looking at her going, what is going through your mind? I mean, could you not think you might die in this water? And she's straight over the waves. And then also a bunch of Indians I saw on the way to Everest, they were pilgrims on the way to Galmuk, a trek I've done to Galmuk here. And there are people who, have no business being on a tough trek like that, but they are going to do it. They're just determined they're going to do it. And the death doesn't seem to enter into the equation at all. But anyway, that's what I just think Indians are by nature very open to a lot of stuff, open and accepting of a lot of stuff, as opposed to the West, which has turned very cynical and very dark. And so it's the best of times, the worst of times, the best of, lots of people and the worst of having lots of people around you.
And what about running in the Delhi's AQI?
Yeah, that's always interesting. I sort of figure that my lungs are cooked. So the first 10 years probably cooked them, and the last 5 years were just browning the edges or something. And I was very sobered by the last article I read that said that, the video with a surgeon, a lung surgeon at AIMS, and he was saying that he's seeing an increase in the number of non-smoking related lung cancers, the number of females who are presenting who are non-smokers, the number of younger people who are getting it. And I can't remember what the fourth one was, but he was explaining that it takes 25 or so years, 25 to 30 years of exposure
before the effects begin to show.
Before effects begin to show. And he said what is very troubling is that people who've been born in Delhi are now coming to him at age 25 or 30 with lung cancer. Simply by having that level of exposure. So all of us at a certain age, you think, I've got all this time. We're not thinking about the coming generations. Those babies, your bub, 2 years of age, it says this is a real problem. This is, and he's it's not like some airy-fairy bloke. He's the lung surgeon at AIMS. He knows what he's doing. He sees so many people going through because it's a research hospital.
Right.
So I found that very, very sobering, more than most of the other statistics we read.
Yeah.
Well, as I said, I think I'm probably a bit beyond that. And my husband is a smoker, so I should be more careful. I don't go out now. I don't go out if the AQI is over about 315 or something. But we all know that is going to kill most people. Yeah, exactly.
But it's funny when people say it's 300, and I'm like, it's pretty good.
And that's
it's as
30
good as
times
it gets.
higher than, exactly. It's so much
It's
higher
not
than the world.
700 or 800.
No, we just get lulled into this false sense of security. It's all relative. But we're just burying our heads in the sand. It is just crazy.
A lot of people don't like this question. Oh, what's next? Do you have stuff that you would really like to do? Things coming up, things planned? Or things in the distant horizon?
I have both. Kind of keeps me going.
Yeah.
I like to know I've got a few goals. So I guess the biggest one is the World Championships for long course triathlon in Lake Taupo in New Zealand in December next year. I qualified in Goa this year. In that very hot triathlon. More good luck than circumstance, given the number of women not in my age group. However, so that's I'm training. We'll start training for that in the new year, and that will inform a lot of what I do during the year. But I've already locked away a couple of things. One is, I'm going on another cycling tour of Sri Lanka in mid-January. I'm going to do a solo Camino it's called Rua Via de la Plata, or the Silver Route in Spain, which is from Seville to Gijón, so the far south to the far north of Spain. It's 1,000 kilometers, and I want to do that solo in April. Got a 7-day swim tour of the Outer Hebrides that I've signed up for and paid for, but now I'm beginning to think that might be a bit cold. So the Outer Hebrides is in Scotland. Intellectually, I'm trying to get my head around cold water swimming. The reality is I don't really enjoy cold water swimming. I love the clarity of the water, but gee whiz. So anyway, I'm just trying to get my head around all of that. And a few in travel, just normal travel that we do. So that's this next year mapped out. Okay. In terms of my bucket list, I still have 2 things on my bucket list that I've seen myself doing. So for all the reasons we talked about before, it's going to happen. I'm just not sure how or when. One is Kona, the World Championships for the full distance Ironman. Right. And I want it to be Kona, not, as you're probably aware now, they've broken the men's and the women's competition up. So it used to be both male and female on the same day in Kona. Then they split it to men being on one day, women being on another day. Okay. Now they've split it between Nice and Kona, so in France.
Yes.
So for me, it's got to be the year the women are racing in Kona. So that cuts it down to, we'll see. And the other one is the English Channel, which is something that has always been an adventure that I wanted to do.
Someone like the profile of yours, you probably should have done it by now.
Well, funnily enough, many people think I have.
Yeah.
Particularly people who've been to my talks. I was like, no, I never said that I swam the English Channel. That'd be silly. But I think they confuse the Maui Channel swim that I've done. But it's a big undertaking. And
you want to do a solo or a relay?
Solo. Relay looks too hard. I remember my friend Moet talking about, how cold it was when he got back on the boat, never really warmed up, and then have to get back in and, and then get wet. And sounds too hard. I think once I get in the water, I just want to get the thing finished. And I'm not so fond of relays. I'd rather just do the thing myself. But that will be a 2-year lead project. Up. And there's there's a couple of long distance swims that almost everybody who does a channel swim does.
Okay.
So I'm planning for that.
Yeah. So what's coming up is a lot more triathlon and swimming oriented stuff.
Yeah, and cycling and
That's great. So we're also training for a triathlon, and
so I hear.
You're going to be training in Delhi. So we'll hopefully catch you on some of the runs or the rides.
Absolutely, and I hope to be there cheering you on in Goa. So
will you be there? Oh, you have.
I'll make sure. Yeah, I'll make sure we're there. Yeah, okay. So I can.
Amazing.
I won't guarantee I'll come and do the race though. I think once in that heat's enough, but I'll definitely be there to cheer you on.
Wonderful, thank you. And just before we go, any advice for people who are sort of trying to get better in 2024? People who are sort of finding themselves stuck in life. How do you think they can get a move on and achieve some of the goals that they've been wanting to achieve for a long time?
I think it goes back to what we said earlier, and that is you really do need to look within. No advancement, I think, ever takes place unless you really start to look at yourself. And I think the best way to do that is through meditation. Not necessarily formal meditation, just taking time to be on your own, to allow yourself with your own thoughts or without thoughts, just, kind of clearing your mind, Because, again, my lovely meditation teacher, I was complaining about something that was going on around me and why couldn't these people understand? And I belong in India? And, I give them this brief and why have they taken that? Why don't they just follow it through and finish it? Typical Western, kind of projection of expectation. And she just looked at me and she said, well, you either leave India or you change. I said, why should I have to change? She said, because you have to change. She said, these people are not going to change. Circumstances are not necessarily going to change. You have to look at yourself and think, okay, what change do I want? What is the right change for me? How far am I prepared to change? Or else you just change direction. Now, I don't want to leave India. I don't want to leave my husband. So, it was a very good lesson to me in having to stop and just reflect on the things that are important. And I think, people who are stuck, they shouldn't force change. I don't know about you, but any time I've ever tried to take a decision, it's been the wrong one. If I've tried to force a decision and it wasn't coming easily, it's always been the wrong decision. Life will take you where it's supposed to take you if you just listen to what's going on inside you. And I'm a great believer in that. Mm-hmm. So look within is what I would say to people who are stuck and wanting to make themselves better.
Wise words.
Thank you.
And what does the process look like? So somebody who's, let's say, not used to meditation at all, and in fact, a lot of people, I am a meditator, so I understand intuitively what you're talking about, but a lot of people don't do meditation. They don't even understand the value that it might bring. They say, so on the surface level value that people can get out of meditation is being less stressed and, being able to perform their everyday tasks, also feeling more cheerful probably through the day or a little less stressed, whatever, right? They say, I'm actually a happy person and I don't face any of these issues, and why should I meditate? What's the case for meditation? So what does the process of inquiry look like?
If we go back to your previous question, which is if people are stuck or they're not happy where they are and they're wanting to change, right, then they're obviously not happy, and so therefore there is something that they might want to change.
Those who are doing fine don't probably need it.
They're fine. They're doing fine. But I think everybody benefits from self-reflection. And I think in this day and age where we're all programmed, as we discussed, to do, and never stop and either think or not think, just reflect, just be with yourself. Yeah. I think it's behoves all of us to do that on a regular basis. It doesn't have to be formal meditation. I meditate when I swim. I like to think I meditate when I swim because I'm not thinking about anything other than the strokes and and I count and so my mind is being cleared. And I remember my Nash, the spiritual coach I had in Australia, he used to liken meditation. Do you remember we were talking about the cassette tape? Mm-hmm. And we used to have cleaners for the old Walkmans. You probably don't remember that, but they looked like a cassette.
Oh yeah.
And it was reel to reel, and it went into your Walkman, and it cleaned the heads on your cassette, so that the build up of dust and stuff came off. Yeah. And he used to say meditation is like that, as a cleaner or a video cleaner. You used to have a cleaner for videos as well. It was a bit like that. You stuck it in there, and it was built like a video, and then it would just wipe everything clean. And he said, rather than coming at situations the same way you've always come at situations, by using meditation to clear your head, you come at everything new and fresh, and with a kind of a different perspective and a calmness and and the answers come to you rather than you having to kind of go out and find the answers. And I've always thought it was a lovely analogy of this cassette cleaner, wiping everything clean so that new stuff can come in. And if you think of how many problems people have, it's because, particularly in relationships and stuff, it's because one is expecting set behavior from the other person. It's like, oh, someone does something, you go, oh, I knew you were going to do that. And so one reacts with also known behavior, and the other person goes, oh, I knew they were going to say that. And it all ends up kind of like this. Whereas this person may not have meant that at all. Yeah. We're perceiving, we're judging people on the basis of what our expectations are, and being able to, I think the Buddhists have got it right. I'm not a Buddhist, but I think, their whole philosophy is coming into every situation anew, fresh. Yeah. It's a bit like Rafa Nadal's tennis. Apparently every point he goes into, not thinking about what's gone before, just thinking about what the next shot is. So that's a good philosophy.
Amazing. We can all benefit from that. Wonderful. Susan Hunt, thank you so much.
Thank you. It's been an absolute treat.
Thank you.
Really lovely meeting you. Thank you.
Lovely meeting you too.